Thanks for tuning in. This is the second part of a two-part topic. If you have not seen the previous one, I would encourage you to watch it first. I believe it's episode 8. I think the title of it is You're Not Kind, You're Scared of Conflict. This episode is going to deal with boundaries. I talked a lot in the last episode about codependency, right? And certain ways in which it manifests and how it affects us in different types of relationships and settings. Well, the title of this episode is the kindest people set boundaries. Boundaries are very interesting. So I've done interventions for a little while, right? And it's, I haven't done a ton of them, but I've done a decent amount. But they're very interesting, right? Because there's a lot of conflict going around. But if you're doing an intervention, if you understand addiction, it's a disease of the whole family. If you have been involved, like my loved ones have, when I was in my addiction, you've suffered. And addiction typically creates codependency within the family, or the family gets so caught up, and the addict in their addiction will literally suffocate everyone's attention, and they'll put all their attention towards the one who's suffering. In the process, some of the other siblings, they feel, like they feel neglected, and everyone's work life and stuff suffers. But sometimes, the sickest person in intervention is not the addict. It's the codependent person in the room. It's the person that, is numbing their own pain and trauma by constantly focusing on the addict's problems. And sometimes they don't want them to get better, and they will enable them. And in those situations, we have to break those barriers in order for the addict to get better. The kindest people set boundaries. It's an interesting thing, and there's a distinction between boundaries and walls, and it's very important. Boundaries protect us. Walls keep people from getting in. Okay, a wall is an example, and it's just, I use a lot, but it's a good example, right, of someone who is abandoned when they're young, and they're terrified, and they don't process it right, and their little kid tells themselves that this person left me, whether it was mom or dad or whoever, because I'm not lovable. And so later on in life, they get what's called avoidant attachment, and when anyone gets close, the more they love them, the more they care about them, the more they'll push them away, because they feel, no matter what, that they're gonna leave them, and it's a very sad situation. And so they create walls, and they think that it protects them. It's really sad. In the dating pool, most people are avoidant. That's why they're single. There's another thing I'll talk about, anxious attachment. Typically anxious people, they, a lot of times they jump into things way too quickly, or always need to be in a relationship. And, then there's the middle part where we want to get, which is secure. But this isn't about anxious avoidant attachment. I'll talk about that when I go more into dating as well. But walls do not protect us. Walls keep us from meaningful relationships and opportunities that will help advance us. But, we're scared because of the unknown or the risks. Well, if you guard your heart forever because you've been hurt, guess what? You might not feel that hurt again, but you might just die alone. I'll get my heart broke 1,000 times to find her. I don't want to, but I will. And when I like a woman, it's crazy. It's crazy how she knows I like her. But I do something really crazy. I tell her. I know. We don't tell people, they'll freak out, right? We got to do so much. No, I just tell her. And like I said before, I tell people how I am. I explain my personality. I explain my boundaries when dating, which are very, very interesting, but they protect me. I set boundaries. not walls. Walls do not protect us. Walls are typically created as trauma responses when the brain thinks it needs to protect us. Well, boundaries are hard when you're not used to setting them. And they're hard with people when you set them that are not used to boundaries because they do not like them very well. I've had certain boundaries result in violent conflicts. And I did not love that, but I don't regret it because in the end, every other area was exhausted and it was what it came to. I'm not a pacifist. I think there's a time and a place when you have to protect yourself, but that's only in severe situations, and I think you can minimize that almost every time. I've learned, the codependent me, like I mentioned in the last episode, would be in some sort of relationship, be it romantic, platonic, whatever it is, and have some sort of behavior that would bother me. Oh, I would put it by the wayside, right? And then it would exhibit again. And it may trigger me if I hadn't processed my trauma to some other behavior, but I'd just deal with it, right? Because I didn't want to upset the person. I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I'm hanging out with them and it bothers me more. And they start to do more and more things. Well, the type of guy I am, eventually I'm going to blow up. And that's not fun when I blow up. And I don't like it. And, if you're 40 years old and you're still trying to be a tough guy, that's not very cool. It's not cool to lose your temper. But in my mind, I thought I was just being patient and kind and just dealing with stuff. Well, I don't always need to address what I don't like with people because, my inner circle's relatively small. And the healthier I get, it seems like the smaller I get. The healthier I get, my dating pool gets much, much smaller. In fact, I haven't went on a date for a year. And it's not because I'm not dating. And it's not because I'm picky. I know what I want. And I have worked through my trauma. And I don't want to get back into a codependent situation, especially with all the knowledge I have where someone hasn't, and try and date them and fall for them and at the same time try to pull them out of their trauma. It does not work. And it's very painful, and I think we've all done it in one way, shape, or form. At this point, I've got my finances in order. I have a good situation with my children. I've got a good business. I take care of myself. I put a lot of time and money into my appearance. It's important to me. And people say, well, you're picky. I'm dated for a year. Well, am I picky? Or am I just looking for compatibility? You're telling me I'm supposed to settle with what I believe is the most important decision in eternity and has the potential through the power of Jesus Christ and his temples to last forever, that I should, settle? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. So, but understanding what I want and stuff is important. And and my point, and I digress, but my point in this is understanding when I don't like something, addressing it right away. If I'm around someone and their behavior I can tell isn't going to work with me, but I'm just friendly with them, this and that, I'm probably not always going to mention their behavior. Sometimes I will. Sometimes if I think it's going to help them, I'll say something. I don't care if it offends them or not, if I think it's going to help them. But I don't always do that. I don't always need to. If they just don't work with me, they just don't work with me. Well, there's some people that show promise, that I want to see if I can form a relationship, whether it be romantic or platonic. There's certain people that I have to have relationships with. Well, at least I should have relationships with family members, employees, employers, children, different things like that. But we have to learn to set boundaries. Because if you don't take care of yourself first, you can't show up for other people. In recovery, they always said, you got to do it for yourself. You got to change for yourself. I'm like, well, I hate myself, but I love my children. It won't work for myself, so I kept trying to do it for my children. Well, it didn't work. Well, I finally understood, if I'm not at my best, I can't be there for my children. If I don't get a hold of these things, I can't show up for them. So I changed for myself so I could be happy, and also that I could be better for the people I love. So when we are in a relationship or a situation with someone and someone does something we don't like in our codependent state, or if we've been traumatized by conflict or different things, our natural inclination is to let it slide. Well, like I said, if you let it slide too much, if you're like me, you're going to fight or fly. I'm more of the fight type. The flight type is going to just stop talking to the person and eventually hope they go away. Well, a lot of you women know that a lot of guys don't go away for a long time and don't get it. When I see a behavior I don't like, I address it immediately. It doesn't have to be a big deal. If it is with someone that is a regular part of my life, or if it's someone I want to be a regular part of my life, hey, that just doesn't work for me. And then I set a boundary. With the people that are in my life, that behavior, we don't do that to each other, right? And then I set, if I need to, a consequence. If that's how you are, no harm, no foul, I'm not offended, but you and I just don't really work, so I'm going to go my own way. And if I set that consequence and they do it, I go my own way. I cut it. That does not mean there can be a reconciliation later on, but it makes things way, way, way easier. It makes things way, way, way easier, as opposed to the other way where I just, deal with the stuff and deal with it and don't do it that way. Well, as you start to do this, it's going to be hard because people that aren't used to having boundaries set don't like them. That's me. That was me. Me a little bit still. We don't like them, And when you set a boundary, it can hurt someone's feelings. It can make them upset. People can gaslight you, which is, making you feel like you're the problem and it's your fault and you're uncompassionate and being kind and rude. They can test your resolve. They can continue to try and push your boundaries and do all these things. It can create all kinds of issues in relationships. All kinds. But for me, if it's not a compatible relationship, or if it's not a healthy one, at least in the moment, not saying it can't be later, it's just not a compatible relationship or it's not a healthy one. So I'm going to do the best I can to either make it that way or I'm going to sever it. The kindest people set boundaries. What do boundaries do? If there's a situation with someone in my life and they're exhibiting some sort of behavior that is so toxic that it's actually requiring me to address it, even to the point to where the consequence might be severe enough to cutting them out, I have to probably think that they're exhibiting that behavior with most people in their life. Well, giving someone a consequence may just allow them to change. If they really want me in their life, if they're like, I like Cade quite a bit, and if I keep doing this, then Cade's not going to be in my life, well, then maybe I need to change because I don't want to lose him. I changed because I wanted to be there for my children. I wanted them to grow up. If I didn't get clean, I was going to die the way my addiction was going. I changed because my family were starting to need to set boundaries with me because my personal relationships were suffering. So people are going to, when you're used to this cycle and you start to stick up in a relationship or situation where you haven't, you're going to be met with some sort of backlash. But the kindest people set them. Because if they're exhibiting that, even if I'm not, even if it doesn't work with you, even if I say, hey, this doesn't work with you, but that behavior is toxic, well, if enough people have the same issue, the same behavior, eventually they'll start to think there might be an issue. It's amazing to me how many people cannot have one healthy relationship in their life, and they still think everyone else is the problem. That's addiction personified. That's what happens when we're in our addiction. Well, if so many different people are cutting ties with you, and everyone is different, and the common denominator is you, then you might be the problem. Well, that was my case in situations, and thank goodness there were people kind enough with me to let me know what the problem was. My group of friends are extremely loyal friends. My close group of friends, my single friends, my married friends are too, but we all are interesting. And you know, it's interesting when women come over to our houses, especially, none of us live together anymore, but we used to, and they'd be like, "God, we heard this was the wild house. We heard this was the party house." Like, you know, and maybe early on, very early on, it was a little while, but certainly not that way. But, well, where'd you hear that from? Well, from other men. Well, imagine that. You guys are actually the safe ones. If you want to know what type of man I am, don't ask someone else. I would encourage you to ask my Heavenly Father what type of man His Son is. And He'll tell you. For you women, when thinking about a decision and you realize that, you know, the part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part with your intuition, it's 3 times the size of a man's. Why is that? Well, you aren't blessed with the physical attributes of a man to protect yourself. Where women get into trouble is they don't trust that gut intuition. It's never wrong. When I was in rehab out in Louisiana, we had a guy that he's talking to all these addicts, right? And most of us at this point don't believe in God or hate Him. And he's like, you know that little thing you call your conscience, that little deep down thing, is it ever wrong? No. He said, there's no way you're that smart. That's God. So you trust that. You trust that intuition. Well, one interesting thing about my group of friends is, you know, I don't know if there is another group, whether it's in this, you know, LDS single scene or not. I'm sure there is, but I know many at least that have stayed friends as long as all of us have. We've all stayed friends because we have certain rules we go by. We do not cross each other with women. We don't claim women. But if one of us likes one, the other ones step back and they give that a chance. We don't send messages. We don't flirt that way. That's a great way to destroy relationships, and jealousy is one of the worst things. If one of us breaks up, and this has happened more than once, and the girl's upset, she tries to date the friends, we don't do that. If down the road we are interested in a girl that one of my friends has dated, before anything, we go to them and ask them, how do you feel about it? Are you over it? I have legitimate interest. Well, if I have legitimate interest and my buddy says, no matter what, I'm not going to end up with her, then I feel like I'm okay to go there. But we honor that. We tell each other what we want to hear, need to hear, not what we want. You know, I've had some of my friends say brutal things to me, brutal things that I needed. You know, a year and a half ago, I was turning into an egomaniac and I was getting out of control. He said some brutal things that I needed. You know, a true mark of masculinity a lot of times is the amount of male friends you have, because you're not feeling insecure around men, because you're not fighting. It's always an interesting thing to me. With women, I tend to, you know, think it's good when they have a decent amount of female friends. To me, in a way, and it's not always the case, and don't get me wrong, there's exceptions, but I think it sometimes is a sign of loyalty, because we don't let those things get in our way. We've set boundaries, and we keep boundaries, and it's created extremely rich friendships with my brothers that would do anything for me. And we have our differences, and we have our issues, and you know, we've gotten heated, but we love each other, and we care about each other. I had an intervention not too while back, and this one was personal. I was nervous. When someone is on stimulants for too long, their brain goes into what's called psychosis. And it's a combination of stimulants and lack of sleep. Well, there's not a distinguishable difference between that and schizophrenia. And typically people become paranoid in that state. They're dangerous, they're volatile, they think the government's after them. If you try to help them, they think you're after them. If you try to do an intervention when they're in that state, they think you're working for the government. It's a kind of a dangerous situation. Well, this loved one was been on stimulants for a long time and was in and out of psychoses. They were using and not using. Well, there were times when I had to separate myself for years and watch him go through horrible things. But I understood if I was to put myself in the situation at that time, because I love them so much, it would have been codependent. I wouldn't have been able to show up for my children. It would have affected my work. I also understood it would have been enabling them. You get to continue to have them in your presence while you're doing this toxic behavior, so I had to pull myself away. Well, I won't get into too many specifics, but an opportunity arose. And for me, it wasn't as scary because I had received a very strong priesthood blessing and I just knew it was going to work out. But before that, I was talking to my therapist about it, and I was scared. But there was a small window to get this person some help, who I love more than anything. Interventions, when you do them with family members, typically don't go very well. There's a reason there's licensed interventionalists, and if you're struggling or family members, you can find them. There's a lot of good ones. You can Google them. There's fantastic ones throughout Utah. They can help with those situations. The reason a therapist doesn't treat his brother or sister is because they already know each other. There's what's called transference there. There's transference. There's bias. The ones we love, our emotional concern for them, it interferes with our ability to be subjective and to give good feedback. So they typically don't go as well. But in planning it, I realized that the other person that was in the house could not handle that behavior. There were some health issues, there were some heart issues, and it would have created incredible stress. And I was worried about that other person because I didn't know if it would cause issues with their heart. So it was clear that the living situation couldn't continue to stay where it stayed. So we made arrangements to seek and get help. And there was the chance it wasn't going to go through. Did not know what to do if it wasn't going to go through. Certainly we were going to say, well, you can't stay here. You cannot stay here. But that was scary. Well, where are they going to go? They have nowhere to go. Are they going to be homeless? What are they going to do? And, my therapist's advice was have them involuntarily committed to a psych ward for 3 days. Have the police come, arrest them. Within 3 days, hopefully they'll stabilize, get off the drugs, think rationally, and accept help. Well, in this situation, if that would have happened, and that was one of the greatest fears of this person, and I would have done that, and they would have ended up getting involuntarily committed and come out and choose not for help, they probably never would have talked to me again. But I was willing to do that. Because if I would have missed that chance, I never would have forgiven myself. That's love. That's not codependency. That's I will I'll let you hate me forever, but I love you enough to do so. You know, when I do interventions with people, you know, I talk to parents especially, you know, we find out who the enablers are first, and, you know, you set boundaries and consequences if the person doesn't get help, like I talked about. And it's scary, especially as a parent-child relationship. Well, they've threatened to kill themselves. Well, not a lot of addicts kill themselves because of spite. A lot certainly kill themselves because of pain and stuff, but I don't know if it happens a lot just to prove someone wrong. I'm not saying it doesn't. But when they're like, well, you got to tell them, if you don't get help, there's no more money, you can't come home. Well, what if they die? Well, the reality is you're watching them die before your eyes, a very slow and painful death. But as long as you enable them, as long as you give them a safety net, as long as you keep giving them money, as long as you keep giving them a fallback, they'll never change. Help them hit their bottom, love them enough to do so. And if they die, at least you can say, I tried my best and I wasn't complicit in it. God is the ultimate anti-enabler. He will not enable our negative behavior. He loves us enough to allow us to experience consequences. And in my case, things happened that, you know, a lot weren't my fault. And as you can see in my story, and I cursed him, I screamed at him, and I demeaned him, and I used his children to numb myself, and I caused all kinds of chaos. And he just let me do it because he loved me, because he knew what was best for me. I believe in not in enabling, but in empowering people. Today, you know where you stand with me. I set my boundaries. I do not like conflict. I have a gift for bringing people's trauma out. And you know what? Some of my methods in the past have been extremely harsh. And this past year, I've certainly been more careful with what I say because I am very triggering by nature. And that's not always a bad thing. If I'm triggered, if someone actually triggers me, then I'm typically not very upset with them, or at least for very often, I'm trying to figure out what it was about me that allowed that to affect me and what I need to do, because it's only me that allows myself to get frustrated or get triggered. But it's such a gift to set boundaries, to let people know where you stand. If you want to see me struggle with someone, put me with someone who is passive aggressive. I'm working on it, but it's very hard for me, right? If you feel that way, but if you're passively, aggressively trying to let me know, I'll pick up on it and I'll probably just talk to you about it right away. But I understand why people do that, because they don't like conflict. Take control of your life. If someone is perpetually hurting you, treating you bad, causing you struggles, causing you to not be able to show up for work, family, cut them off. Cut them off. You don't have to sit there at your detriment and in the name of what is kind of tried to be called love, take care of them. Love's a two-way street. I'm not saying we don't suffer for those we love. We do. Christ himself said, greater man hath no love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. I suffer for the people that I love. But when my suffering for them is actually not helping them, but hurting them, or when my suffering for them is causing me to suffer in ways that I'm actually can't show up for other people or for myself, I'm no longer helping them. I'm enabling them. Again, the books I mentioned, and like I said, there's certainly people that are way better at this than me. You cannot cover everything in what am I at? 30 minutes right now. Codependent No More is a very good book. It's about boundaries. It's about, codependency as well. There's another book called Boundaries, which is Christian-based. It's another very good one. My recommendation is, if you can, get a therapist. I know so many people that can't afford it but are so caught up in the cost. That's how I was. But, once I learned to get rid of this issue, for the most part, man, I make a lot more money. I'm able to cover that cost. I spend a lot of money to meet with my therapist every week, and have for years now, because he makes my life better. He helps me understand things. He points out behaviors that I'm not cognizant of. Also, he's my master's or doctorate education in what I do, because a lot of our stuff at this point is processing and understanding stuff, and he's one of the best there is. If you're reading books, I know 100 people that have read 100 self-help books, and they read the same ones over and over again. They never change. Find someone to be accountable to, that will hold you accountable. Tell them what you've learned. Ask them to help you understand when that behavior manifests. Ask them to call you out on it. Try to control yourself when they do. Find a way to be accountable with it so that you can create change. But this life is too short to be alone. It's also too short to be around people you don't want to be around. I do not like being alone. I don't have to. There's this idea spread, especially among the single world, that you've got to learn to love being alone. I think it's dangerous. I think it goes against everything I've ever learned in psychology. I think that we're meant to connect together. I think that you have to be okay being alone. I think that, for me, I had to learn to be alone and not make horrible decisions. But for me, basically, that meant I had to start to live in a way that I respected how I lived, whether it was my moral system or my values or how I was acting with people. And then I had to be organized, because if I'm alone and I'm not one of those things, my mind's going to go to those things, and it's going to be very painful to be alone. Well, the only thing I think is worse than being alone is being around people you don't want to be around. I'd rather be alone. But we heal together. You attract what you are. You attract and keep what you are. Initially, you may attract a lot of different types. I attract and detract, by the way, all types of very different people. But the people that stay in my life that are a constant, they all share certain common things. And to an extent, we're somewhere around the same level. And those relationships, they enrich my life. This life is about relationships. They're the greatest agent of change. They're the greatest thing I know of to help people heal. Just like that story I talked about in my last episode of that poor kid raised in the Russian orphanage like a dog. Healthy relationships will heal you. Codependent relationships where we try to save others at the expense of our health, are not healthy relationships. I'm grateful that I learned about codependency, and it took me a long time, and I'm still can fall into patterns of it, and it is especially susceptible to people with a very sympathetic nature, because we do want to help. But as I said in the beginning of last episode when I started, one day Ryan, my therapist, said, "You are the most sensitive person I ever met." I was, but in two ways. Like I said, I would get offended extremely quickly as well as being sensitive. Today, I'm not a very sensitive person. I'm not. I'm a very empathetic person. I'm very empathetic, but I do not get offended easily at all. And in another episode, I'll talk about why I don't resentments, what they do, and how hurt they are. I hope that you've enjoyed these two episodes. I hope I've been able to convey to you what I've tried to. If you like my content, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Half my friends still don't know how to, and family members. The benefit of subscribing, if you like it, is you're just going to be notified of when I put out content. But you have to have a YouTube account. If you have a YouTube account, you click enable notifications. Just like a text message or something else, you can be notified of when I do things. But this work for me is a work of love. It is, what I've always prayed for from God. Help me to be in a position to help the most amount of people possible. And I've had some incredible experiences since I've started. And it's been incredibly difficult, but it's been so worth it. If you find value in this, please share it. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me. I sometimes can't respond to everyone given what I have going, but I certainly will try, or certainly, a lot of the time I tell people I don't have the resources. I can't diagnose people, I don't do those things, but hey, I know a resource that will help you, because I know a lot of people that are extremely skilled in a lot of different ways. So thanks for listening. I'll continue to put stuff out and have fun and, get people to where when I ask them, how is your life going? Well, I'm hanging in there. Well, life's not just hanging in there. Life's about thriving, enjoying, loving, and growing. So let's get our life back.